This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff, repping the 80s.
I'm Ryan, repping the 90s.
This week, we're putting up our spooks.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please open your books to page 13 and settle in for a novel evening of narrative nightmare. In this corner of whimsy and wonder, are you afraid of the dark and the challenger, that putrid pugilist, monsters? This paper cuts deep on Put Up Your Spooks.
This week's theme,
Fatal Fiction.
I've got an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark that I've been dying to bring to you.
I've never heard you mention this one, I don't think.
So, it's a secret, a very secret, special episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark. Because it's not like a traditional horror story, really. It's more like a fantasy. But I love the episode, and when you were like, you got anything about people telling stories that come to life? I was like, hot dog, do I?
I was shocked that you did not use this as an opportunity to bring Big Bad Beetleborgs into the fray.
Well, that's not about them telling stories that come to life. Well, it's about comic book characters that come to life via magic, but it's not about the actual characters telling the stories.
Right, but they go into a spooky haunted house,
Yeah,
and they do some make-believe, and then things come true. I thought you would just jump on it.
They don't do any make-believe, they just make a wish. And it's not nearly as matched, as well met as Are You Afraid of the Dark's The Tale of the Bookish Babysitter.
My story's about stories.
A. Midnight Society. Night. Frank is being a misogynist dick. It has no bearing on the story. B. Midnight Society. Continuous. Betty Ann is reading a book. It does have bearing on the story. Belinda finishes up a babysitting job. The mom comes out and says, next time at, and Belinda knows the exact time and date, she's on it, she's the best babysitter ever, the mom's happy, the children are happy. Belinda drops a book which opens and screams come out of it, and you're thinking, I wonder what that's all about. Kinda spooky.
Belinda is also dressed in a flowing black cloak.
She's got cloak, she's got sharp Maximus style bangs, Caesar cut, bleach blonde, very spooky, very magical, very mystical.
One might say witchy.
Very Canadian. Cut to a little rotund Ricky, 12 years old, watching a black and white public domain movie on the TV, as children of 12 are wont to do. Belinda arrives at the house to babysit Ricky because his mom is going out to show some real estate, and Ricky is pissed.
A babysitter? Mom, I'm 12 years old.
Right off the bat, the mom thinks Belinda is like a weirdo freak. She's like, oh, you're the babysitter? With your flowing black cloak and your Maximus-style Caesar cut? And Belinda's like, that's me, baby. Love it, or get out. Belinda compliments Ricky's death metal shirt, and he's like, oh, gee, thanks. I really love this metal band that... Wait a second. You can't butter me up. I hate babysitters, and I hate you. And then the mom is like, you got everything? You got the emergency numbers? You know where the wet wipes are? And she's like, I got this. I'm the best babysitter. And hurries the mom out the door. Shuts off the public domain black and white movie. Magics the remote away in spooktacular fashion. And cons Ricky into reading a book. She says if he reads it for at least 5 minutes, she'll let him watch all the TV he wants. So he thinks it's a pretty good deal, so he grabs a book and starts reading.
It was late on a dark, moonless night as a wild storm raged across the moors.
Suddenly the lights flicker, the wind picks up outside, but he doesn't like this book. It's kind of boring, so he closes it with a snap, and all that stops. He reads the next book, which is all about knights and King Arthurs and castles. This really cool shadow play starts up behind him. The lights come on, and this ghostly hand reaches out. But you know what? This one's boring, too. He snaps that one closed. The ghostly hand fades out. Belinda says,
No. Once you start a book, you really should finish it.
dun dun dun. Ricky grabs a book, but she snatches it back and says, you know what? You're not ready for this one. So he goes to his bedroom to sulk, plays his little electronic football game, when suddenly a knight in armor tries to cleave him with a broadsword, only managing to slice his pillow with a poof of feathers. We did use feather pillows at this time, so that trope is still...
It tracks.
Yep. So he runs out into the hall, where a ghost immediately rolls up on him. He screams... And he locks himself in the living room where Belinda is burning her books. And she's like, these things came from the books, so if we burn them, it stands to reason that these things will go away. So he starts burning the books. Then Belinda's voice screams out from outside the living room and says, do not listen to me. And then he's like, what's going on? Then Belinda crashes through the doors. She's like, get away from her. And he's like, who, what, where, when? And then the witch, and then Belinda, the bird, and then the book-burning Belinda springs up from behind him and says, it's me, Ricky! And she's a hideous witch, waggling her tongue Brad Pitt style. But not confusingly so in this situation. Belinda and Ricky run away, lock themselves in the kitchen, block the door with a moving island. Belinda's like, Ricky, you gotta finish the story, but since you burned all my books, you little Hitler fuck, you gotta do it. So he makes up like this really crappy story. Everything goes away in the end. And she's like, I don't think so. That's cheating, you filthy suck. No sucks allowed in this storytelling adventure. Suddenly the knight cleaves through the door with an axe. And the witch pushes the island aside, I guess with her magic, and breaks into the kitchen on the other side. They scream, they run, they lock themselves into the basement. Once again, Belinda says, you gotta finish this story. So Ricky makes up this crazy ending about...
They ran down to the basement where he kept his Uzi. Yeah, his Uzi! Just in case of attacks by knights, ghosts, and other nasty things.
Afraid not.
I gotta say, if I were in Ricky's shoes, I would also try to conjure an Uzi, and at this point I thought it was Chekhov's Uzi. I was like, brilliant.
Yeah, where's that Uzi?
If you can conjure anything you want.
It's so funny, like, he goes, his Uzi, and then he looks around the basement expecting the Uzi to appear, and it does a slow pan, the camera does a slow pan around the basement, just to make sure we know there's no such thing as an Uzi going to appear now. She said that makes no sense for this story. There are witches and knights.
That's how you know it's in Canada. If that had been a proper American basement, there would have been at least
Uzis everywhere.
A Mac-10, Tech 9, something.
So he's like, you know what? What's that book you're always clutching and peeking into when you think I'm not looking? She's like, there's nothing in this book. And he grabs it. He's like, give it to me! And he grabs it out of her hands. And then he looks in, and there's literally nothing in it. So he flips through the pages, and as he does so, he's transported into a slimy, dripping, oozing dungeon with no way out. And the book starts filling in as he's reading it. It describes how the walls are unscalable and how the workman seemingly had no way of getting out, and just then he steps on the bones of the workman.
So there's a really neat effect here where as he's talking, the things he's saying are appearing as text in the blank pages. And that reminded me of that crazy scene in season 1 of Westworld where one of the robots gets a tablet that is displaying her internal monologue. And like as soon as she can think and react to what's happening on the tablet, it's also displaying everything she is saying and will say, and that causes her brain to basically break. And I was hoping the same thing would happen to Ricky.
To this annoying little shit. That's a really proper analogy because it's not like he's making it up. At first, it fills in what he says, but thereafter it fills in before he's able to do anything, and he's kind of just following the book, and it gives him clues even as to how to like proceed.
There's like a 1-to-1 when he first looks at the blank page and everything he says appears on the page, but then he starts looking away from the book and talking to himself, making observations, reacting to things, skimming the book. Someone else comes out, like, it gets away, yeah.
Yeah, so a knight comes out and tries to cleave him with the sword, and then he starts reading. The knight was looking for a sign to protect its lost master or whatever, and he's like, a sign? So then he realizes, oh, my shirt, because his sword looks exactly like the sword on his shirt. So he shows the knight his shirt, and the knight hands over the sword and takes a knee, and then the book is like, he knew he'd have to cleave some bitches, and he's like, I don't want to cleave any bitches, and he drops the sword, and then a little girl shows up, and is like, help me, mister, help me. I don't know how to get out of here. Soon my bones will litter the ground much like these workmen. And he's like, a little girl? And then he reads in the book, the little girl seemed out of place. And then he's like, out of place? Out of another story! And he realizes the little girl is actually the witch. And she turns into the witch, and then he grabs up the sword, cleaves her in twain. She turns into green goo and melts into a puddle on the ground, which is pretty awesome.
That was pretty wild when he bisected her and she bled out and gush of green slime.
Right across the midriff raptor style. So then a secret door opens up to a tomb, and the ghost rolls up on him once again, singing, "Oh!" And then he reads in the book, the ghost was free from the witch's curse. Now that the witch had been cleaved in twain and turned to goo, raptor style, the ghost turns into a vibrant king. Ricky kneels and presents the sword and finds himself back in his living room, and he reads the last of the phantom blank book, and then his mom comes home, finds him reading, and he's like, yeah, I love reading. And then they're like, Ricky, that book's got your name on it.
The Dark Tomb by Ricky Winter.
Then the mom is like, Belinda, what do I owe you? And Belinda says, don't worry, I've already been paid. Then, out at the Midnight Society, Tucker steals Betty Ann's book, that little shit, and he reads. Then Tucker snatched the book, and Betty Ann slapped him across the face. And then he's like, what? She played me. She played me. Betty Ann psyched Tucker out by inserting his actions into the book because she knew exactly what was going to happen. The end.
Don't stop now.
So, Ryan, this episode was 1,000% you. I can see why you love it so much.
I realize that most of the stories I come up with are just bloated Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes in disguise.
Right, but if you were to ever tell a story about a cursed mirror or a cursed camera or an evil doll, you will see that it's all very well-trod territory, but they're classics.
So I really do like that episode. I think it really turned me on when he gets into the dungeon. You know, there's a crazy witch down there, cool knight, cool king. Also, I was always a fan of knights and Arthur and stuff like that. So yeah, it had everything I love, including reading books. Although it is funny, this episode harps so much on how shitty it is to watch TV instead of reading a book. But as usual, it's like a TV show.
It is a TV show. Are there other episodes that veer so hard into fantasy?
Badge is kind of a fantasy episode.
Yeah.
Although much more horror fantasy.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I was surprised at how little horror there was in this, but I think for a kid, just the ghost appearing behind him, chasing him down the hallway, a knight, trying to cut you in half with a sword, that's pretty effective.
Yeah.
Even if it's medieval fantasy, it is someone in your house trying to kill you.
Sure, yeah, and this witch popping up behind him as a kind of a spook, putting up her spooks. I think there was a lot of good filmmaking technique on display in this episode.
That is a classic creepypasta of you're talking to someone and then you hear someone from outside saying, like, don't listen to them, and you realize one of them is a doppelganger.
Mm-hmm. Well, they stole it from this too. All creepypasta writers, I'm sure, were Are You Afraid of the Dark fans.
They're like, what? That old show? I've never seen it.
Oh, that's true. They're way too young.
Any other notes about that episode?
My main note is just how much of a rip-off artist I am.
This one's boring.
My episode is Season 1, Episode 18 of Monsters, The Match Game. We open on a creepy Victorian mansion. A teenage girl, Kirsty, from the Hellraiser series, urges her friend to check it out. This is the spooky hangout, and it's the first time Paul has been invited. He's nervous for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that the house is literally whispering his name. But Kirsty makes it clear that spooky shit turns her on, so it's a date. That night, they meet up in the parlor of the abandoned house. Beverly, played by Tori Spelling, is muttering about Paul being a creep, but her leather jacket-wearing boyfriend, Matthew, defies expectations and cuts Paul some slack. He introduces the match game.
Okay. This is how it works. First guy lights a match. Starts telling a story. When the match burns down, he stops. And the next person in line continues where he left off.
Okay, I don't know the story.
Well, there is no story. We make it up as we go along.
He begins. It's been 50 years since the owner of the house threw himself into the pond out back. His name?
Herbert Waverly.
I immediately must interject just to say that these kids are all like almost master storytellers. They don't stumble, they don't correct themselves. They just lay it out from start to finish. I guess when you have a burning match in your hand, it ups the stakes.
It focuses the mind, but later Kirsty says that they've done it thousands of times.
Oh, well,
so,
there you go. I guess that's why.
Yeah, they've got some, they're 10,000 hours. Cut to the pond. Zombie fingers reach up from the mire.
From the slime. I liked that shot a lot.
Tori picks up the story and weaves a tale of star-crossed lovers. Herbert was in love with the wife of a prominent politician. Her match burns down, and now it's Christy's turn. She describes how Herbert and Ethel, the politician's wife, would meet in secret at the pond to get down. When her husband found out, he locked her in the attic and went to the pond to ambush Herbert. Paul picks up the story.
A terrible fight. But Herbert's bigger, stronger. Grabs the guy by the throat, drags him down to the edge of the pond, forces his head beneath the water. His lungs fill with the still, rancid waters of the pond, and soon he's dead.
Everyone watches in wonder as Paul's match continues to burn. He goes on. Herbert buries the husband in a hasty grave and then rides through the gathering storm to be with his beloved. Paul is in a trance now, describing his vision as if he were there. And when he describes a bolt of lightning, there's a flash and boom outside the abandoned mansion. Tori does not like this at all. As for Herbert, the lightning spooks his horse. He is thrown only to land face first in the blades of a threshing machine. The flesh is split from his skull, but somehow he survives. He is so close to his goal that he can hear the clock inside toll the midnight hour. On cue, the clock in the parlor begins to chime. Paul's match finally goes out. Tori is pissed that someone wound the clock to scare them, and she wants to go home. But Matthew's having a good time, so he decides to put it to a vote. They stay to finish the tale, unaware that the shambling corpse of Herbert Waverly is drawing ever nearer. As they tell it, Herbert limped home that night, but his face was so scarred and mangled that he was shunned by everyone, even Ethel. He grew twisted and bitter, the hate causing his wounds to fester, making him ever more disfigured. Unable to bear the sight of his own reflection, he moved all the mirrors to an upstairs room and shrouded them in sheets. Herbert went mad with despair and threw himself into the pond. He drowned, but his hate lived on. But on stormy nights like this, he crawls from the muck and returns to his mansion to kill any teens inside telling spooky stories. Tori FFOs. She can hear Herbert Waverly creeping outside the door. Her boyfriend Matthew tells her there's nothing out there but the corpse of Herbert Waverly blasts through the window and body slams his ass to the floor. Matthew stabs the zombie with a fireplace poker, but that only puts him within neck-snapping range. The rest of the teens dash upstairs and discover a room full of covered mirrors, just like in Paul's story. Tori screams that this is all his fault. He's evil. But her complaints are cut short when zombie Herbert busts in and pulps her entire head into gack.
Herbert, that's so... Yeah. I was going to say gack. Like, that was the exact word. It's incredible. Like, first he, like, sucks all the... Because they say he is going to come and suck their souls or something.
If you look into his eyes, it'll, like, drain your soul.
So, like, her head deflates at first and becomes, like, a husk. And then he pulps it. I was like, no, that head's all dry. Ain't no pulp in there. No gack. But... Ooh, yeah, and then he plays with the gack in his hands. It's just gack with two eyeballs drooping out of it, and he plays with it for like a full 40 minutes.
Herbert amuses himself with makeup artist Dick Smith's gory gack effects for a while, until he catches his reflection. This grosses him out, so Paul chases him away with a mirror. Herbert says, "Fuck that," and goes to get the fireplace poker. It's time to smash those goddamn mirrors like he should have all those years ago. Kirsty realizes that the magic was inside Paul all along. If they wish to banish Herbert Waverly, they have to finish the story. She pops a match and begins with an impressive commitment to the craft. She doesn't say an anvil drops on the zombie's head or anything.
No Uzi.
She sets the mood with the raging storm and the terrified, cowering final victims. She really is a spookosexual. Paul figures this out and briskly takes over. A tree crashes in and impales the zombie. But that's not enough to stop the super zombie, however, so Paul disbands the thunderstorm and makes the frickin' sunrise. Herbert poofs from existence as the last match fizzles out. The end.
I was thinking, like, did he just fuck up all life on Earth? Because he manifested the sunrise, thereby altering time. I was like, ooh, that's going to have some consequences.
I don't know if he changed time, if he changed the orbit of the planet.
Either way, we're doomed.
If he caused a solar storm, and like solar flares were shooting up past the rim of the planet. But yeah, Paul has a lot of magic in his storytelling. So they walk out into the sunlight, arm in arm, and I'm like,
their other two friends are
what
dead.
are they going to tell the cops? Are they going to pretend like it didn't happen? And the cops are going to be like, I see what happened here. The boyfriend turned the girlfriend's head into gack.
Yeah, I know.
And,
I was thinking the same thing. I was
fella
like,
broke his neck.
They're going to have some splaining to do. But, like, why didn't he just say, oh, and also they were
My
okay.
friends came back to life.
They emerged from the lake, shaken, but not stirred.
Sorry, that is cheating.
I don't know what the limits of Paul's powers are, because he did disband a storm and make the sun itself rise. So
He really did.
I got to say that Monsters has a terrible habit of undercutting the punch of their endings with their terrible end theme song.
Oh, yeah. So I like the theme song, but it doesn't fit the series.
The intro theme has a little more spookiness going on for it, but the end theme is these digital synth trumpets that are like...
It's like the music that would play over a silly puppet monster family who are watching sitcoms. Right. Which also doesn't fit the tone of the episodes.
I thought it was so funny that when Kirsty was showing Paul the house, she's like, oh yeah, the old guy that used to own this place? Yeah, he jumped in the pond out back and killed himself. And everyone knows that. That's like the lore of this creepy house. And so they start telling the story, kind of Exquisite Corpse, round robin style. It gets to the part where there's this deadly fight at the edge of the pond, but because they're all trading off on the story, it kind of gets away from them. And so Herbert Waverly kills the jealous husband, like, in the pond, and then buries him, and then rides across town, and then gets messed up, and then comes back, but he lives, and then years later he's so upset they have to retcon it that he then jumps into the pond.
Right.
I thought that was it felt true with like that
Exquisite
kind of
Corpse
rambling
style,
storytelling. Yeah.
I guess they maybe should do another 1,000 before they've really honed their skills. I think that they, on that same line, they're with a girl, I forget her character name, even though you've said it 1,000. Kirsty ends the story perfectly, and then the fucking kid picks up another match and is like, blood, horror, death. He continues the story unnecessarily.
Well, Paul is like seeing visions of what actually happened, or something, because the house started talking to him the second he got there. Paul the Dreamer.
I loved that we didn't see it all, or we weren't really seeing much of it. Like, most of the episode was just them sitting in a circle telling the story, and I just was thrilled about it.
So good.
Yeah.
One of the best episodes of Monsters I think we've ever
Fantastic.
had on the show.
And then, we got our fun with the zombie, like a single very good zombie melting heads into gack.
He wasn't like a stumbling, mindless zombie. Like, he was taking actions.
Yeah, he was a Jason zombie.
Yeah, he got chased off, and so he went and got the fire poker and was like, I'm going to smash these mirrors. Then what?
So this kid, the Dazed and Confused / Buffy the movie kid, he's got a bad habit of getting lifted bodily by the neck and getting his head bones crushed by a superpowered monster. It happens in Halloween 4 the exact same way.
He was typecast, but if you got a niche, I say work it.
Casting one head crush guy. Yes! It's the part I was born to play, baby.
I really liked the mechanic of lighting a match. Because it's like Midnight Society. You're in the dark. You're gathered around a flame. You're telling the story. But each match burns at a different rate. And there are these nice little textural touches. Like, it might go out. It might burn your fingers. At one point, Tori Spelling just blows her match out. Because she likes the line she delivered. And then, it's going around the circle. And then when you finally get to Paul and the match stays lit. And it has all this, like, meaning and supernatural import.
So what was going on? Was the house trying to manifest itself, its story, and so it was holding on Paul because it knew that he had the power? Or, like, why was his match staying lit? It was clearly a supernatural occurrence, because it wasn't even burning down. It wasn't like it was burning down slowly. It just wasn't burning down at all.
And also, the clock over their head told midnight. Lightning flashed outside, as he described, a lightning flash. But what's interesting is Herbert was the fourth to tag in on the story, but as soon as Matthew went, Herbert Waverly, Herbert crawled up out of the muck. It wasn't like it needed Paul to describe that scene for him to come out.
It's the magic of the house.
So this is where the what the factor starts to climb.
Yeah.
It's very confusing. I'm not sure how this works. And is there a sequel? Do they go back the next night and he's like, and a truck backed up with $1 million? And I thought it was so funny when Kirsty's like, you have to finish the story or he'll kill us all. And then she lights a match and she's like, the storm raged on. They cowered, peeing themselves as the monster appeared. And it's like, dude, get to the part where you get rid of him.
Maybe she was just trying to jumpstart Paul, who was frozen with terror.
I maintain that she was a spookosexual. In the beginning, when she's like, I got so scared last night. I couldn't sleep at all. And I was like, oh, she's going to eat Paul the Dreamer for lunch.
It helps with the mood.
It's time to put these two monsters head to head. So this one is going to get philosophical. Body count. I would definitely say 2 for monsters. We saw those. But then the zombie is manifested and banished, so that kind of cancels itself out. Body count for Tale of the Bookish Babysitter.
Just 1.
Who's the one?
The witch. She gets sliced across the belly and turned into goo.
Was she even alive, or is she just a creature of fiction, of imagination?
Well, she's still a character, and she comes into his living room.
Fair.
And we see her get slashed across the belly and turned into goo.
And the night just kind of falls apart.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that part, because I glanced away when that happens. That's great.
Scare factor for Tale of the Bookish Babysitter?
I would think it's medium. Good for kids.
Scare factor for monsters? I'd say pretty high. When the zombie is busting through the window and dragging people, it's pretty stylish. It's well shot horror.
If I'd seen that as a kid, it would have fucked my shit up.
Yeah. Gross factor? I mean,
quite high, yeah.
You got the gack with the eyeballs.
And a gacky zombie.
Dick Smith doing the Lord's work, as always.
And then the gross for Are You Afraid of the Dark? It's not really that gross. Just the slimy goo, I guess, is a little gross, but pretty low.
The witch is gross, and then when she gets bisected with the sword and goops out is pretty gross. But it's not gack gross.
No.
What the factor for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I think it's low.
I was confused as to Belinda's motivation. She's a witch, and she can use the power of imagination to send kids into fantastical realms so that she can babysit them?
What is the motivation of every great teacher? Just to stimulate young minds. That's payment enough.
But is she selling the books? Is like that her payment? Is that like how she gets books?
She's clearly a little witchy, so she could probably like conjure herself up food. Maybe she doesn't even need to eat, really. So she doesn't really need money, as far as I'm concerned.
So instead of a house, she just goes to other people's houses and hangs out with their children.
And cleans out their fridges like every good babysitter. You know, if she needs to live somewhere and go to bed, she can probably just start reading one of her books, go to a cozy cottage, and eat some porridge, and sleep in a bed that's just right. And then when she needs to go babysitting again, she, can finish the book and then go out back into the real world and go babysitting.
Leave before the bears get there.
Exactly.
That makes sense. What the factor for monsters? I would say surprisingly high, because once you start to peel the onion, you're like, wait a minute. What is going on? How does this work? Is the house possessed? Is there a curse?
Yeah,
is there a zombie? Is it all in Paul's imagination? Is it super fertile? Theme, fatal fiction. I'll call that a tie.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tie. I mean, just by its age bracket, Monsters is a bit more fatal.
Yeah, that's always the case when we compare these shows. Certainly Ricky's tale was fatal to the characters he conjured.
Yeah, and himself, if he'd gotten stuck down there with those workmen.
Yeah, I wonder if Belinda could have gotten him out. All right, totally 80s for Monsters, I got nothing.
No.
If anything, I would say it's hella 90s because it had Tori Spelling in it, even though it's 1989.
Although as I was watching it, something happened and I was like, God bless the 80s. I guess it was just because it was slasher horror, zombie, gross. It reminded me of great 80s slasher horror movies in the best way.
It had really good practical effects in a way that Are You Afraid of the Dark usually leans on primitive CGI. So totally 80s. I guess I'm giving it to Monsters. How about Are You Afraid of the Dark? Anything for hella 90s?
Pretty 90s light, I would say. Except that it was like pretty scholastic book fairy in that they were trying to get the kids to read books, which I'm sure still goes on in schools. I don't know. Unless the alt-right has banned the scholastic book fair from schools.
Looking at the tail of the tape, our winner, Monsters, the match game. Like I said, I really enjoyed the match game. I thought it was a really inventive way to tell a story, and we present stories on this show, so why not put our money where our mouth is and get into it? Do you have some matches there?
Yes.
All right, cool. I got mine. It was a dark and stormy night, and an unstoppable super zombie was going to bust into Ryan's place and just absolutely demolish his head. Like, just deflated basketball, go to town, elbows deep, all the way in his gizzard, and just like pull out his eyes and play with him and wrap the optic nerves around his fingers like a booger and really make a meal out of shredding and parsing and squishing and squeezing every little disgusting globule of Brian's greasy, putrid brain. Oh! There goes the smoke alarm. Oh, God. The sprinklers.
Rerun for my life!